Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I am Aiman Amani, and together with my group mates, Nur Ain Fariha, Nurul, Nailah, and Alya Nasreen, will be presenting on our constitutional law assignment titled The Dewan Rakyat is More Powerful Than Dewan Negara? An Answer. The Malaysian Parliament is a bicameral parliament in which the legislature is made up of two separate chambers, the upper house and the lower house, and this system can be traced back to the reign of Edward I. The upper house, or the House of Lords, is made up of noblemen and leading magnates, whereas the House of Commons is made up of the gentry and the merchant classes. Contrary to the Parliament of England, which is a sovereign parliament developed over many centuries, the Parliament of Malaysia gets its legitimacy from the Federal Constitution. Therefore, under a constitutional supremacy, the extent and limitation of power of the two houses stem from the provisions under the Federal Constitution. And Article 44 provides that there will be two houses of Parliament, the first being the upper house, or also called as the Senate or the Dewan Negara, whereas there will also be a lower house, also called the House of Representatives or the Dewan Rakyat. In England, the lower house is formed due to the rise of the middle classes. In Malaysia, the bicameralism serves a very different purpose. Bicameralism is popular in federal countries due to the needs to balance the rights of the collectives as well as the rights of the member states and the minorities. And so in Malaysia, the upper house represents the voice of the member states as well as members of certain minority groups. However, the lower house is the collective voice of the people representing the whole federation. And so the objective of having bicameralism, as stated in the Rate Commission, is to balance the rights of the member states as well as the rights of the whole federation. Articles 60 to 67 of the Rate Commission report recommends on the formation of the Houses of Parliament. And Article 60 discusses on the lower house, or the House of Representatives, or the Dewan Rakyat, and that its members should be elected directly by the people in their constituency on a territorial basis, and they should not be nominated. However, they made a exception for the upper house in Article 61. The Senate, or the Dewan Negara, should be comprised of a mix of indirectly elected people as well as those nominated by the Yang di-Pertuan Besar, which was the recommended name for the head of the federation at that time. And so, under the Dewan Negara, there should be two members that comes from each state who would be indirectly elected from the state, whereas 11 members of the Senate would be nominated by the Yang di-Pertuan Besar. And from here, we can see that there is an imbalance of authority from the start, because members of the Dewan Rakyat has been elected into their office, whereas members of the Dewan Negara are either indirectly elected or nominated. And in a democratic country, of course, members who are elected are seen to have more authority because they represent the voices of the people. And in fact, Article 62 of the Rate Commission report does recognize this and states that the power of the Senate should be considerably less than the powers of the House of Representatives in legislation and administration, and that within the Senate, the elected members should be a majority, even though they are indirectly elected. And they also recommended that the Parliament should have the power to later increase the number of members who are elected to the Senate from 2 to 3, whereas they should replace the system of indirect election to a direct election. And they also recommended that the Parliament should later reduce the number of nominated members or even abolish them entirely. On top of that, if we look at Article 64 of the Rate Commission report, it explicitly recommends that the Senate, or the Dewan Negara, has much less direct control over legislation and administration than the House of Representatives. And for example, the Dewan Rakyat can make any bills, including money bills, whereas the Dewan Negara are limited only to enacting bills, not including money bills. This view is further strengthened in the dissenting arguments of Sir William McKell and Mr. Justice Abdul Hamid. They rely their arguments on the fact that voting is essential to parliamentary democracy, and so they oppose the Rate Commission's recommendation on the formation of the Dewan Negara. While they still agree that bicameralism is needed in a federal country, they suggest that instead there should be equality between the Senate and the House of Representatives, first by the number of members, and secondly, that both houses of parliament should have their members being directly elected into. This brings up the question, if members who are nominated have less authority than those who are elected, then why does the Reid Commission recommend that there should be nominated members in the parliament? And so Article 62 explains their rationale in making this recommendation. And they stated that it is important for the country to have nominated legislature, at least in its forming years, because this will allow members who are distinguished in their professions and who have contributed a lot to the country to contribute some more, even though they are unwilling to stand for election. And this will also allow for the voices of minorities as well as the Aborigines to be heard, even if they are not represented by the majority. And they also recognize that they are impressed by the memoranda and evidence submitted on behalf of the rulers of the state at the time and the alliance parties that recommends the need for nominated individuals in the parliament. We looked at the Reid Commission report, we will now look at the historical development of the parliament, because even though the Reid Commission report talks about the objectives of the provisions, and so it does have the basic structure and the early draft of the constitution, which is heavily based on the Westminster model, but it is important to remember that ultimately this report is simply a recommendation, and the final draft has gone through many revisions and not all of the provisions has been kept. However, the basic structure of the parliament does more or less retain what was recommended by the Reid Commission. However, since the formation of the constitution and the formation of the parliament, there has been changes to the Dewan Negara which goes directly against the recommendation of the Reid Commission. For example, the first 16 senators which were first appointed by the Yang di-Pertuan Agong in the early days of the constitution has been increased to 40. And this, of course, goes against the Reid Commission report that suggests that we should reduce the number of nominated members or even abolish it altogether. And in fact, now we can see that appointed senators are the majority in the Senate, instead of being the minority to the members who are indirectly elected. And state representatives are still not directly elected, which was recommended by the Reid Commission report as well. Nonetheless, the core objectives of both chambers remain the same as was recommended in the Reid Commission report. And in the Reid Commission report, in Article 64, even though they explicitly recognize that the Dewan Rakyat is to be more powerful and has more authority than the Dewan Negara, they do state that the Dewan Negara is not a less important chamber. In fact, they are on equal footing. However, they serve different purposes and different objectives. The Dewan Negara only acts as a check and balance to the system, allowing for the voices of public opinions to manifest during a delay, for example, or having the voices of minorities to be heard, or becoming an influential forum of discussion and debate by allowing members who are distinguished in their professions and those who have contributed a lot to the country to voice out their opinions on legislation.
Legislation is the law enacted by the legislature and by bodies and persons authorized by the legislature. In Malaysia, the power to enact law is vested in the parliament at the federal level and the state legislative assembly at the state level. The federal constitution is the supreme law of the land. They can enact law only within the limitation and in the manner prescribed by the federal and state constitutions that are available in Chapter 1, Part 4 of Federal Constitutions. Legislative system in Malaysia is governed under Article 44 of the Federal Constitution, accompanied with the authority of the Parliament below it that consists of Yang di-Pertuan Agong and two houses of Parliament, which are Dewan Rakyat and Dewan Negara. For Dewan Rakyat, the composition of the House of Representatives or Dewan Rakyat is provided under Article 46 of the Federal Constitution. The lower chamber of Malaysia's federal legislature, the bicameral parliament, is known as Dewan Rakyat. Article 44 of the Federal Constitution establishes the chamber and its authority. Dewan Rakyat and Dewan Negara are both located at the House of Parliament in Kuala Lumpur. The Dewan Rakyat is a directly elected representative with 222 members of parliament. First past the post voting is used to elect members with one representative coming from each federal constituency. Members remain in office until the Dewan Rakyat is dissolved, which may only happen 5 years after an election under the Constitution. According to Article 46 of Constitution, each state or territory is entitled to a certain number of seats, while both chambers of parliament must agree for legislation to be passed. In practice, the Dewan Rakyat has much more power than the Dewan Negara, as the upper house hardly ever overturns legislation that Dewan Rakyat has approved, and Dewan Rakyat can override Dewan Negara if it refuses to pass a particular law twice with at least a year in between. Dewan Rakyat is the only house to which the cabinet is accountable and answerable, and the Prime Minister simply has to keep the support of the lower chamber. The members of House of Representatives are referred as Yang Berhormat or Ahli Dewan Rakyat by the general public. As long as the member prevails in the elections, the term of office is unbounded. In order to be qualified as a member of Dewan Rakyat, a person must be 18 years old and above, and cannot also be Dewan Rakyat member at the same time. The Speaker of Dewan Rakyat is chosen by MPs or members of parliament at the start of each parliamentary session or following a vacancy in the position preside over Dewan Rakyat. Additional 2 deputy speakers are chosen. One of them takes the speaker's position when he is not present. The Yang Tuan Agong appoints the clerk of the house, who is responsible for overseeing the Dewan Rakyat's operation. He may only ousted from his position in the same way judges are, or by forcing him to retire at the age of 60. The Election Commission draws the federal constituency from which 222 members are chosen. Every 10 years, new constituency lines are established based on the most recent census. A general election must be called after each Dewan Rakyat maximum tenure of 5 years. Voters choose a candidate in the general election to represent their district in the Dewan Rakyat.
Next, moving on to the Dewan Negara. Dewan Negara is the prestigious part of the parliament, which is it is to envisioned to focus on occupying an intellectual and influential position. So the Dewan Negara or the Senate should also be above political tension, as the quality of the senators and the Dewan Negara's legislative work is based on its full potential. Article 45 of the Federal Constitution stated that Dewan Negara should consist of 70 members, which is 2 senators from each state, 2 senators from Federal Territories of Kuala Lumpur, Labuan and Putrajaya. The other 40 senators for the whole Malaysia will be appointed and elected by Agong with the advice of Prime Ministers. So the senators should be addressed as senator, and their age must not less than 30 years old, and they cannot be a Dewan Rakyat member at the same time. So the senators can be also among the politicians or free members. So the Agong also appoints the clerks of the house and has the authority to grant or withhold agreement to dissolve the parliament.
The distinction between Dewan Rakyat and Dewan Negara can be seen from the function of Dewan Rakyat, where the members of Dewan Rakyat have the power to reject the bills at the second reading and committee stage. At the second reading is the most crucial stage, where the bill will be debated thoroughly by both houses, and voting on the bills will be made, in which only the members of Dewan Rakyat can reject the bill. If needed and agreed by both houses, the bill will pass to the commission stage. The committee stage also requires the special committee or the whole house committee from Dewan Rakyat to delve their discussion on the said bill, and their committee have the right to alter or amend the bill. Dewan Rakyat also participate actively in discussing people's issues and problems in order to cater the best mechanism in the making of the bill where it finds necessary and effective. Dewan Rakyat also in charge in reviewing and debating government policy, enacting and passing federal laws, and has casting power on money bills. To manage tabling of parliamentary papers such as comment paper, statute, and the process of gazetting it, the House has the power in discussing people's issues and problems and proposing solutions for the issues being brought up. The House also has the right in reviewing and debating government policy in order to necessitate the community. As mentioned in Article 68 Clause 1, Dewan Rakyat has the power to enact the pass money bill since it within the ambit of said House. Another difference that can be identified between two houses is in the context of membership of each house. The Dewan Rakyat consists of 222 members that are elected by the people or won in the general election, and they are often called as the members of parliament or the people's representatives. The position of its member will be assigned by the Prime Minister at the beginning of the parliament. The members of Dewan Rakyat can be among the politics members or independent members which does not involve in any political parties. period of tenure of Dewan Rakyat members is not limited as long as the one they won in the election being made in their district or area. Meanwhile, Dewan Negara consists of 70 members, only that are being appointed or elected, and they hold the title of senator. The assemblymen from each state will elect 2 members of assemblymen to get the total of 26 senators, and Yang di-Pertuan Agong will appoint 2 senators from the federal territories of Kuala Lumpur, Labuan, Putrajaya, and 40 senators from the whole Malaysia with the advice of Prime Minister. Overall, there are 40 senators being appointed by Yang di-Pertuan Agong under Article 45 Clause 3, stated that the term of office of a member of the Senate is 3 years and is not being affected by the dissolution of Parliament. The age of the member of the Senate is not less than 30 years old, as a Senate must be someone who has experience and expert elected and appointed by Yang di-Pertuan Agong. The senator can be a person who has made outstanding contributions in public service, can be a person who achieved honors in a field of profession, trade, enterprise, agriculture, cultural activities, or community service, and he can be the person who represents minorities or interests of indigenous people. Clause 4 under the same article provided that the Parliament has power to increase or decrease the number of members to be elected for each state.
There are some similarities between the both houses, and we can find it under Article 48 Clause 1, which is the disqualifications. The disqualifications of a member is happen when the member is found to be unsound, undischarged, bankrupt, or holds an office of profit. The member should not to be nominated for election to either state, House of Parliament, or to Legislative Assembly of a state. The member must not be convicted of an offence by a court and sentenced to imprisonment for a term less than 1 year, or to a fine of not less than 2,000 ringgit, and not receive a free pardon. The member should also not acquire citizenship from a country outside the Federation. And under Article 48 Clause 2, which stated that a person committing offences in connection with election person who has been convicted of such an offence or in proceeding relating to an election and has been proven guilty shall not be qualified to be a member of House of Parliament. And a member under Article 49 stated that a person cannot hold a dual membership. So we can find another similarity between the both houses, which is the privileges of Parliament. Privileges of Parliament is described under Article 63, which explains about the protection for the members of Parliament from being questioned in any court when the proceeding has been validated. It means that no person shall be liable in any court for anything that he has said or any vote that he had made in the proceeding of the both houses. However, Clause 2, as I mentioned just now, shall not be applied to the person who is charged under Clause 4 of Article 10 or under Sedition Act 1948 as amended by the Emergency Essential Powers Ordinance number 45/1970. And also, no person shall be liable to any proceedings in any court in respect of anything that he has said to the Yang di-Pertuan Agong or any other rulers, except where he started to advocate the abolition of the constitutional position of the Yang di-Pertuan Agong as the supreme head of the of the federation, or the constitutional position of the ruler of a state. But it should be noted that a person would be liable, or a member would be liable, if it is said outside of the parliament or outside of the proceedings. So it is clear that privileges and disqualifications of parliament is the same for both of the houses.
When looking at which of the House of Parliament is more powerful, it is not a surprise for us to find that the Dewan Rakyat is in fact more powerful than the Dewan Negara. And this has many reasons, the first of which, of course, is the legislative process, and this has been dominated by the Dewan Rakyat. The Dewan Rakyat is able to enact and pass all laws, and they also have the power to reject bills. However, the Dewan Negara can only enact and pass some laws. Of course, they are not allowed to pass the money bill, and they cannot reject bills outright, but they can only delay bills. Depending on the type, they can be either 1 year or 1 month. Legislative procedure is also dominated by the Dewan Rakyat. They have a stage in the committee stage in which they are able to thoroughly debate all of the provisions of the new bill, and they also have the casting power on money bills. and amendment of bills will be based on the votes of Dewan Rakyat. Nonetheless, special privileges are granted equally to both chambers. This allows for the freedom of speech in parliamentary proceedings, so it will allow them to openly and thoroughly debate all the provisions under the bill, its relevance, importance, effects, and consequences. Dewan Rakyat actually agrees with the objectives of both houses in the Reid Commission report, as well as the vision of the Commission that the Dewan Rakyat should have more legislative power than Dewan Negara. And of course, this goes back to the functions and the objectives of both houses. The Dewan Negara has always meant to be the main legislative body, with their members being directly elected into the parliament, whereas the Dewan Negara only serves as a check and balance to the excesses of democracy.
Alright, now I will explain on the criticism and reformation of the Dewan Negara. So the Dewan Negara, or upper house of the Malaysian Parliament, is not seen as an influential or important forum for debate and discussion by the public, despite its role as the upper house of Parliament. While much attention has been focused on reforming the lower house, which is the Dewan Rakyat, it is also important for us to consider reforming the Dewan Negara. So, in this part of the video, we will identify the issues it currently faces and discuss the effectiveness and significance of the Dewan Negara in the Malaysian parliamentary system. Therefore, in this part of the video, we will discuss whether there are any loopholes to the concept of democracy in the Dewan Negara and what solutions we can highlight. So, the Dewan Negara or Senate is one of the two houses of parliament of Malaysia, as established by Article 44 of the Federal Constitution. It has legislative authority and can introduce and review legislation. In addition, to hold debates on legislation passed by the Dewan Rakyat, as provided under Article 66, Clause 3 of the Federal Constitution. But despite that, the power of the Dewan Negara is restricted from introducing or amending money bills, which must be passed exclusively by the Dewan Rakyat, as provided under Article 67, Clause 1 of the Federal Constitution. And this has dismantled the original intention of an influential forum of debate and discussion. In consequence, the Dewan Negara looks like a mere rubber stamp of formalities, and if the Dewan Negara does not pass a money bill without amendments within a month, it can be presented directly to the Yang di-Pertuan Agong, which is the head of state, for assent by passing the Dewan Negara. While for other types of bills, the Dewan Negara can reject or pass them with amendments that may not be agreed to by the Dewan Rakyat, as provided under Article 68, Clause 2 of the Federal Constitution. So in this case, the bill will be debated again by the Dewan Rakyat at least 1 year later, as mentioned in Article 68, Clause 2, Para B of the Federal Constitution. So if the Dewan Rakyat passes the bill without accepting amendments by the Dewan Negara, or with those specified in Article 68, Clause 3 of the Federal Constitution, and the Dewan Negara rejects or passes the bill with amendments not agreed to by the Dewan Rakyat, the bill, either in its original form or with mutually agreed amendments, will be presented directly to the Yang di-Pertuan Agong for assent, as provided under Article 68, Clause 3 of the Federal Constitution. And this process will allows the Dewan Rakyat to bypass any objections from the Dewan Negara and to avoid a legislative feedback between the two houses. And the Dewan Rakyat can choose not to negotiate with the Dewan Negara if the bill is not considered urgent, as it can simply repeat the legislative process and bypass the reservations of the Dewan Negara. Now let's take a look first on the criticisms of the Dewan Negara. So firstly, despite the law provided in the Federal Constitution, the appointment of senators are criticized as they are not elected. Hence, no public accountability and transparency. For instance, if almost more than half of the members of the Dewan Negara is dominated by members from Group A, which is from the current ruling government. If there are any debatable discussions, the senators from the dominant party will eventually give their support to the policy made by the government. That is their own party. So this led to a non-existence of transparency and accountability from both houses of parliament. This is evidently supported that if dominated by the ruling federal coalition, state legislative assemblies could ensure the election of a compliant senator. So even if the senators form the majority in the Dewan Negara, they may be less inclined to act independently as representatives of their respective states in chamber. So next, the period of parliamentary sitting has now been cut to an even shorter period, that is 24 days compared to 60 days in the Dewan Rakyat. This severely, significantly reduces the time available for the legislative work, as there is simply not enough time for the Dewan Negara to introduce its own legislation while also debating government legislation. Again, this has knocked down the vision of the Reid Commission to make Dewan Negara as a political body capable of performing democratic parliamentary reviews to ensure legislative quality. While in the context of composition of the Senate, without public intervention, candidates for state senator are proposed and voted by members of the respective state legislative assemblies. And in assemblies dominated by a single party or coalition, the state legislative assemblies will mostly propose a name mutually agreed upon by party consensus, which then significantly reduces the election of state senators. Again, as a mere form of formality. So we can analyze this pattern as undemocratic because of lack of involvement, which forbids forbids public evaluation of their respective candidates. Hence, it leads to inadequate understanding of the identities of the state senators, and this equates into a broader apathy with the broader implication of limiting opportunities to hold state senators accountable to the public. And on the other hand, the federally appointed senators and the federal territory senators are appointed by the Yang di-Pertuan Agong on the advice of the Prime Minister must be persons which generally have rendered distinguished public service and have achieved distinction, are sufficient to qualify a person to become a senator of the Dewan Negara. So these two clauses are in the federal constitution are critically criticized by the public, as it lets the Prime Minister with power to nominate without accountability and ignorance towards the appointee's public reputation. For instance, Tan Sri Muhammad Ali Rostam was elected as a senator representing Malacca in 2013, despite his long career in politics as chief minister, and was also accused by his own party of engaging in money politics and making racial remarks. Okay, that is all on the criticisms of the Dewan Negara. Now let's take a look on the reformation we can propose for the Dewan Negara. So Malaysia practices constitutional monarchy with parliamentary democracy, where the Yang di-Pertuan Agong is the head of state. So the parliament represents the most essential part in a country that practices democratic principles in their parliamentary system, such as in Malaysia. So as we have identified the lack of transparency, accountability and independence of the Dewan Negara, we will discuss the improvements that can be made to the Dewan Negara under this part of the video. So the approach we will take will be upon the findings from this one particular article entitled View of Reforming the Dewan Negara, Its Evolution and Options for Reform. So in our view, the reformation of the Dewan Negara is highly demanding in order to ensure the original purpose of its establishment as an esteemed and influential forum for debate, as they envision in the Reid Commission. So, therefore, the Dewan Negara must be a platform that uphold democracy and composed of competent and qualified senators, as well as being able to criticize the policy made by the executive that is to widen their functions as the upper house of the parliament. If not, the Dewan Negara will remain as a mere rubber stamp of formalities despite its exclusivity in Malaysia parliamentary system. So distinctly, the Dewan Negara should learn from the Australian Senate of their establishment of select committees which specialize in a wide range of policy fields. Based on the establishment of select committees, these allow their Senate to conduct in-depth evaluations of policies enacted by the executive as well as incoming bills from the lower house. Consequently, it enables the Dewan Negara to function actively and more efficiently in their role as the upper house of the parliament. And the committee suggested by the Australian Senate acts as a more efficient way that can be suited with the scrutinization of the Dewan Negara. Not just that, we totally agree that Prime Minister should be removed from its capacity in the appointment of the senators to give more transparency in the process of appointments. Instead, what we can introduce is to let the committee to be given full discretion in choosing and appointing the senators who are of good professional competency of nominees in their given fields, the highest level of propriety, as well as their overall merits and suitability to hold the position in the Dewan Negara. So, in order to achieve this, we agree that the public should be given the chance to evaluate the nominees and the public assess their professional background and competencies, and not to forget if there are any controversial issues involving the nominees. Therefore, what we can do is to open electoral process to the public to elect senators whose opinion is competent to hold the position in the Dewan Negara. However, some might argue that this might not be sustainable in the long term and is not sufficient. Hence, we suggest that further reviews and studies on these matters should be analysed closely to uphold the concept of democracy in the Dewan Negara.
In conclusion, from the historical roots of our constitution, all the way back in the recommendations made by the Red Commission reports, to the present provisions of the federal constitution, it is clear that the Dewan Rakyat has always intended to be more powerful than the Dewan Negara, both in theory and in practice. Hailing its authority from the voices of the people, being directly elected to the parliament, the members of the Dewan Rakyat is given more power in the legislative process. The Dewan Negara, on the other hand, was only meant to be a check and balance to the excesses that may come with the voices of the majority by allowing the member states and the minorities to voice out their opinions and concerns. While they may have less legislative power, they still serve an important element in ensuring equity is served in the enactment of the federal law. However, it is very unfortunate that this noble objectives currently only exists in theory. In practice, we can see that the Dewan Negara is completely subject to the Dewan Rakyat, from the influence of the ruling government in the appointment of the senators, the lack of mechanisms granted to effectively debate and discuss, as well as the indirect pressures onto the ruling government, pushing the members of the Senate to simply agree with the decisions of the Dewan Rakyat. And so instead of checking and balancing the excess of the government, the Dewan Negara becomes just little more than a rubber stamp to the Dewan Rakyat, giving the bills approved by the Dewan Rakyat an illusory boost of authority. For if we want to retain the objective of the Dewan Negara as suggested by the Reid Commission report and finally realize this true objective purportedly championed by the federal constitution, then changes would have to be made to the appointment, the composition, as well as the function of Dewan Negara to allow the Dewan Negara to be independent and finally realize its potential as an influential forum of discussion and debate that it has always meant to be. And this is the end of our presentation. We hope that our discussion has enlightened you onto the powers of the Dewan Negara and the Dewan Rakyat, as well as the objectives of both chambers. Thank you so much for listening. Wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.